Speak No Evil has just been released in cinemas, and this retelling of the 2022 Danish psychological horror movie is one that I've been eagerly anticipating. Before watching this latest version, I rewatched the original and I was keen to see just how similar they'd be. For the most part, in terms of the lines of dialogue, certain decision making behind the shots, and also with the core message, it was the same. However, there was one big difference: the ending. The ending of this movie was a lot tamer, which is weird to say considering what happened to Paddy. With key themes focused on the consequences of not being honest, biting your tongue, and simply being overly polite. Let's delve into this movie and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is a breakdown of Speak No Evil. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. So, at its core, this movie was about what could potentially happen if you don't take yourself out of the situations that you're uncomfortable with at the expense of upsetting somebody else, somebody that you don't even know. When looking at the beginning of the movie, we saw that Ben and Paddy's first encounter was almost like a test that Paddy put upon him. This was the hunt, luring the fish on the hook, as Paddy said. Paddy asked for a sun lounger, and even though it had Agnes's teddy and book on, Ben willingly gave it up, meaning that his daughter went without a chair so a complete stranger could have one. This was something that ran throughout the main character's core, putting other people's happiness and comfortability over his and his family's. He didn't like confrontation unless it was with his family. He wasn't honest, and he didn't vocalize how uncomfortable he was unless it was with his wife. He saw that Paddy had a beer, and he even wanted a beer in the beginning and didn't get one because Louise mentioned that it was a little early for one, showing that he couldn't even really make his own decisions in that moment. This family were people pleasers. Even though Louise was a bit more honest than Ben and actually stood up to Paddy on several occasions, she still cared what others thought as well. For example, during the beginning, she told her daughter to keep her voice down because there were others around, and she even said to Agnes when she felt uncomfortable that it was okay to think certain things, but you shouldn't say them out loud. The kindness, appreciation, and consideration for others was what ultimately landed the family in this situation where their life was on the cusp of being taken away from them, and their daughter was going to be too. Paddy and Ciara's tests were embedded throughout the whole movie. From making Louise eat meat and knowing full well that she was a vegetarian, making Ben pay for the expensive bill that they racked up during dinner, making Louise leave her daughter with a complete stranger where anything could have happened, and also guilt-tripping them into staying after they fled due to feeling uncomfortable. Paddy and Ciara knew that they could manipulate Ben and Louise into staying by mentioning that they had a daughter that died. Even when Paddy and Ciara's true form started to reveal itself, they couldn't bring themselves to leave. Take the ending, for example. Louise and Ben both found out that Paddy and Ciara were these serial killers that would befriend a couple on holiday, kill them, take their child, raise it like it was their own, and then move on to the next family when they got bored of them. Yet even once knowing that, Ben was still willing to walk into a room full of tools with Paddy, leave his family with Ciara where anything could have happened, and not pick up the hammer as a weapon. Something that you could tell that he was contemplating doing at that moment, but he chose not to. Even Ant being thrown into the lake, which caused Ben's family to be trapped because it allowed Paddy to close the gate whilst he went after him. Their kindness was just exploited by the family, and they knew exactly how to get them where they wanted. When Ben said, "Why are you doing this to us?" and with Paddy responding by saying, "Because you let us," it really did highlight that there were multiple opportunities where the couple could have gotten to safety if they had have just listened to their gut, and they hadn't have just been afraid of upsetting two people that Louise even said at the beginning they didn't even know well enough to stay with for a weekend. Agnes knew that something was suspicious, but she was told not to vocalize it by her mother. It was quite powerful hearing Agnes saying to both of her parents that something had been off since they got there, but they were just pretending that everything was fine. Even an 11-year-old knew something was up, and the adults in the situation were just too afraid of upsetting people. The ending of this movie is where it differed drastically from the original. There's going to be spoilers for the original movie here, so if you don't want to hear it, then click to the timestamp ahead. Rather than the couple that were kind facing their death and being stoned in a brutal, horrific fashion in the original, this one was different because the couple actually survived, and it was the evil couple that met their demise. With Paddy being bludgeoned with a stone by Ant, something which felt like a homage to the original movie's ending, I kind of feel like the couple surviving makes the ending lose its potency slightly. The couple die because they were too kind for their own good and they were too afraid of upsetting a couple of strangers, not fighting back once because even when they wanted to, it was too late. Whereas in this, there was a fight back and they did actually go against their core beliefs. Yes, they managed to survive, and it kind of felt like the message was more focused on how they changed after they realized that they needed to be honest and had to fight back. But I don't think that's as powerful as a message. The cyclical nature of this evil couple exploiting kindness and using it as a weakness in somebody was sinister in the original, and it was sinister in this. But they ultimately met their demise at the hands of two people that couldn't even say no to eating meat when one was a vegetarian. So for me, it did lose some of that shock factor and the powerful nature that the original had. The final thing that we saw was both Ben and Louise driving off in the car, not knowing if they'd even be together anymore, especially after what Louise said earlier on where she didn't know if they could make it work. And we also saw Agnes handing over her stuffed bunny to Ant, showing that she'd grown up on this trip, exactly like what her father said she might do, although it happened in a way that he wouldn't have expected. And finally, we had Ant, who was holding the bunny whilst in tears, reflecting on what he'd done. At its core, this movie is about kindness being used as a weapon, and how as a society we can often hold back in what we truly want to say in order to keep people happy and avoid conflict. As Paddy said, everybody talks but nobody's honest with each other. Biting your tongue may keep others happy, but it's often the most uncomfortable part. This 2-hour feature shows us just how deadly biting your tongue can actually be, and the situation that it can land you in if you're never honest. I know it's extreme, but you never know. My review of the movie. I thought this was a good film. I thought the retelling was done in an original fashion, but it still stayed true to what we saw 2 years ago. There were stylistic shots that were pretty much exactly the same, which is something that I respected. The score was haunting to listen to, and it knew exactly when to switch on after moments of awkward silence. Plus, the performances were really strong too. The scene where Ben and Paddy were in the open field, looking at how there was nothing surrounding them, was a moment that I thought we'd come back to at the end. In the original, it's such an important scene, but in this movie, it held no significance whatsoever, so it felt like it was mindlessly included and copied over. The contrast between Ben and Paddy was something that I thought was great in this movie. You really saw the almost yearning to be like Paddy that Ben had when he first met him, and how that continued when they got to the farmhouse. Ben was a weak individual, and he ultimately put his family's life in danger by not taking them out of the situation. Even when they were locked in the room, we saw him crumble, and Louise had to get him to snap out of it. If it weren't for Louise, then he would have been killed by Mike with the glass. One place where I think this movie went wrong was with the casting of Agnes. She was a great actress, don't get me wrong, but I feel like the character shouldn't have been almost 12 years old. She should have been about 8. It just didn't really make sense that she was dependent on this bunny at that age. Her dad also hated the bunny, so it didn't really make sense as to why he went back to the farmhouse when they were fearful of what was going on. I understand that he was a people pleaser and he would have wanted his daughter to have been happy, but his family were the only people that he was actually ever honest with, and he openly stated several times that he hated the bunny, so it didn't make sense at all. In the original, Bjorn hunts around the city to find it because he wants to, so going back made complete sense in that case. James McAvoy absolutely stole this movie with his haunting smile and the false persona that he was giving off. Over the 2-hour runtime, his character changes drastically, and we witness it in front of our very eyes. By the end of the movie, he's somebody completely different, and it was so impressive to watch. There were actually some jump scares that were in this film, which I thought made for an interesting experience. It added another layer to the horror, and it didn't just leave it in the psychological space. Overall, I'd say this film is definitely worth a watch. The serial killer couple have great chemistry, and you find yourself constantly wanting Ben and Louise to just say what they're truly feeling, rather than being backed into a corner and being tested. Whilst the ending isn't as good as the original, if you've not seen it, then this one is still satisfying. It just doesn't have as much weight behind it. So, there you have it, a breakdown of Speak No Evil. If you want to see a breakdown of the original movie from 2022, then click on the card in the top corner. The video should be up there now. Or alternatively, you can find more movies from 2024 broken down over on the channel. And finally, if you'd like to see what I rated this movie out of 5 stars, then head over to my Letterboxd profile. It's where I rate the latest releases in real time. What did you think of Speak No Evil? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.